Hello and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by GoToWebinar and Content Marketing Institute. I'm your host for today's webinar on Supercharging Your Webinar Demand Generation Outcomes Part 2. My name is Joe Polizzi. I'm the founder of the Content Marketing Institute and happy to see you with us today. If you've been with us on the first one, we really talked about the basics of getting your webinar started, and now we're really going to talk about taking this from the nuts and bolts into really getting your webinars produced effectively and ongoing. All right, without further ado, I have the pleasure to introduce my good friend Mike Agron. Mike is also a great friend of Content Marketing Institute. Mike is a webinar demand generation expert, co-founder, and webinar producer. I guess you would say, Mike, executive webinar producer for WebAttract. And I have to say a little personal note about Mike. Mike and I have been working with each other for years now. He's my go-to person when I look at how we can excel at our webinar production, and really happy to have him here on the call, go through it. So Mike, without further ado, why don't you get started?
Delighted. I'm very, very happy to be here, Joe and Citrix, and thanks so much for having us back. It's hard to believe it's been a month since we did part one, so we're going to get right into it. I just want to mention, as I mentioned on part one, that much of what we're going to be talking about today is all based on actual examples and real-life case studies. There's no theory involved. And to augment that, the book you see there, Webinar Ready, is a book that Citrix asked us to put together on how to host a successful webinar. All of you who registered should have received the link to download it. If not, I'll tell you at the end how you can, but it's the syllabus and the primer for everything we're doing. So what I don't cover in some of these examples, I can guarantee you that it's in there. Once we've attracted the audience, how do we achieve the ability to engage the audience, inspire them, so they'll be able to convert more of your prospects into customers? And really, these are the challenges. And to that question, there's three major challenges to doing a webinar. It's attracting the right audience, it's having them attend and be engaged and inspired so they'll want to learn more, and then going into the sales side. And that's exactly what today is about. So with that, what's really important, and this is probably the most important takeaway, and this has come to me through, as Joe was mentioning during our little sound check, doing hundreds and hundreds of webinars. Anybody can do a webinar, but if you really want to have a webinar that follows what we call supercharged and that produces high commercial outcomes that meet or exceed your expectations and delight your audience, they absolutely have to have solid content. But the most important thing to remember is there must be a challenge to the status quo. They cannot be dealing with things as is. People don't have time for that. And so what makes a good environment for a successful webinar? The markets must be disruptive. There must be some change going on in there. The offering or the case study must be around a solution that's also disruptive, and there has to be measurable outcomes. Well, the good news is last week we did a webinar that follows all these, and I'm going to use that as part of my case study. It was for an organization in the automobile industry, and if you think about it, what industry has forever changed the way it does business? That's retail and car sales. Just as in the B2B world, where the buyer is more savvy to be able to do their research online, so are buyers. So I've got a fabulous story to tell you about this, where the audience recruitment goals were beat by more than 200%. So it's timely, it fits right in here. This is probably one of the most important things that you can take away from today's session. Well, what I want you to be able to also take away is that this is about having a deadline-driven methodology, and having a repeatable methodology that's proven will help you get your outcomes. There are a series of best practices, and being able to optimize your results means using metrics and benchmarks. Again, all of these are going to be covered today, and most of them are all in the book. But it's also about delighting your audience and delivering predictable outcomes. If you cannot deliver outcomes that are predictable, then it's going to be difficult to meet your goals. And of course, because we're talking about webinar demand generation, how do you convert more prospects into customers? And it's not always from just doing a one-off. It may be from doing a series, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what we covered in part one was to get behind the scenes. And as you'll see, if you were not here for the first webinar, we take a very theatrical approach to what we do. That's because it's a mini event and it's exciting. And we always look at how do we set the stage for success. And then through that planning, we want to identify and target and get the right audience. We spend a lot of time talking about what works from an invitation standpoint, what works to make it compelling. All of that was covered in part one. We'll touch a little bit on that now. And then how do you breathe life into your production? So after you've attracted the audience, they're engaged and they want to hear more. So today, part two is from show to sale, and we're going to go from winning leads with webinars. We're going to talk about the importance of table reads, dry runs, sound checks. I'm going to show you some things to optimize your ability to connect with the audience even better. We'll talk about the final checklist and going live, and what do you need to do post-webinar to follow up and begin to segment your leads and convert those prospects into customers. Here's the graph that I always look at. The left side is commercial outcomes. The right side is value to your audience on the x-axis. We want to be able to maximize both, and that's what we're talking about. So to get there, I want to now ask you to weigh in on our first poll. And if you would go ahead and pick one and tell me what are your biggest challenges during and after the webinar. All right, looks like everybody's voted. And it's pretty unanimous here, and I don't think there's going to be a surprise, Joe. So let me go ahead and share the results. As you can see, 58% talk about converting from a prospect into a customer, followed by 21% inspiring and retaining my audience, 13% using metrics to benchmark and predict, 4% getting my speakers to stay on message, and 6% technology issues. Joe, how does that align with your expectations?
You know what? It makes sense from the standpoint, and I know you'll talk about this in a little bit, but we've talked about how you take a prospect through the buying journey and not just think, oh, we can do a one-off webinar and get them converted into a customer. It almost never works that way, and that's why I think it's important that you're putting this on today to really talk about the series aspect of continuous webinar creation. If you want to call it a series, that's fine, but how do you move that prospect down the buying funnel and to becoming a customer?
That's absolutely right. And the thing to remember is I think your study from the trends of the effectiveness of tactics that marketeers use, the B2B trends and budgets, has consistently shown that webinars are a top tactic. However, their effectiveness is only going to be as good as the quality of the content, the delivery, and quite frankly, everything I'm going over here. And if you're able to embrace that and provide real information that stimulates people's curiosity, it's not a sales pitch, then you're going to get them to be part of your thought leadership and want to learn more. And that goes to exactly what you're saying. It's got to be more than just a one-off. So let's jump right into the Act 3. We've already started our audience recruitment. We're about 4 weeks out from going live, and now we are going to start to lay content around the messaging. And so the first thing that we do is we want to bring the team or the ensemble, and albeit virtual, for what we call a table read. And what we do here is we're going to architect using the invite to find the key messages and bullets. And then we're going to use intelligence that we gathered before the webinar because, as I mentioned during the first series, this is an ideal time to gather information before, during, and after the webinar. And we're going to use it to understand the audience. And then we want to determine, well, who's going to say what and when? And then we're going to start our dress rehearsals to practice the timing. What I love about webinars and why I think they're the highest form of content marketing, a real art, because it's a time for storytelling. You get to tell a story. It's not reading from slides, and you get to infuse your excitement and passion into something, and that's what connects with the audience. But I look at it also as a radio show, but a radio show with pictures, and that's exactly what we're doing now. We want to keep it fast-paced. We want to give timely information. We want to give the temperature, not always the weather report, because folks don't have time for that. If we get them interested, then they'll want to talk to us afterwards. But here, again, I must come back to this point. Webinars are absolutely great magnets to attract prospects to become customers. But again, people that attend webinars and that are going to have an interest in talking with you afterwards are in either of these two situations. The gentleman on the left is experiencing disruption either in his business, in the industry. There's pain. He's looking for something to relieve that, or he knows he could have better outcomes. The lady on the right is actually knows there's a better solution and she's looking for it. Here's the opportunity for the webinar to educate and make them more intelligent. And again, this goes back to Content Marketing 101. Webinars need to be informational. They need to talk about business value, best practices. Case studies are wonderful for webinars. They can't be a sales pitch. They can't talk about the product, features, benefits, or pricing. Keep that in mind. So what's on the screen now, and it should be up there in just a second, this is an actual invitation for a webinar we did last week. And I'll tell you why it was so fascinating. It's called the case study, How a Dealership Group Leveraged Service Leads to Increase New Car Sales. As I mentioned earlier, retail has forever changed, buying a car has forever changed. And let's face it, what's more iconic, Joe, let me ask you, than going into a new car showroom with your folks when you were a kid, they buy a car and you smell that new car smell. Can you think of anything more iconic than that?
Boy, that doesn't happen very often anymore.
No.
Because we do all our research online. But yeah, I get absolutely.
Exactly. So with that, these car dealerships have a big challenge. The consumer's smarter. But there's an untapped area, and that area is people who bring their cars in for service are what's known as in the service drive. And those people have opportunities to buy a new car. And so this company, MPI, created a very elegant technology that's very disruptive. It's almost predictive analytics that allows car dealership to have a process and technology and use this information to help find potential new buyers. And what it does is it upsells repair orders by 3 to 4%. Think about that. They don't have any more money to put into advertising. They've done everything they can, but now they're using technology. The market's disruptive. They have a disruptive solution. That's why this webinar was oversubscribed and had so many people. But if you look at it, now after the invitation's done, now we need to sit down with our presenters and do a table read. I know it's difficult to read, but there's the title. There's a brief description. There's 3 to 4 bullets of what you'll get out of the webinar, and that's critical. Who should attend? Another important part of a webinar is to leverage the speaker's credentials. I always believe if you can have a third-party thought leader that is a well-respected individual, that's neutral, that's the best thing you can add to your webinar. Then it definitely doesn't sound like a commercial. We also had a general manager, Terry, right here in the second, who put together this case study. And this guy is so excited and so passionate. Our biggest challenge was to make sure that this was able to stay on track. So here was the invitation. So we sat down virtually with our speakers, and what we wanted to do was to get them to remember that we needed to find out what the audience was interested in. So we wanted to mine the digital body language, and I'll show you how we did that. We wanted it to be more of a dialogue, not a monologue. We didn't want it to be death by PowerPoint. And we wanted them to practice their flows and their cues so it would sound natural. Plus, they needed to have visually appealing slides. So let me take a moment to talk a little bit about slides. We could do a whole webinar on this. This is an actual slide. And this is a slide a client gave us that they used for training, and they wanted to put it on a webinar. And I looked at it, and I said, are you kidding? I mean, that's an eye chart. Where do you want me to look? My eye is all over the place. I said, why don't we take that and put a lot of white space behind it, simplify it, and talk to it. So this is the after. The point being, talk to the points, connect with the audience. You don't want your audience spending a lot of time reading. So this is kind of a thing to keep in mind when you're developing slides. Vary it up, put graphics in it, not a lot of bullets, minimize it. But let me show you how that actually worked with this. So during the first part of the series, I mentioned that during the registration, always ask, what would you like to learn from this webinar? It's invaluable. It tells you, is your message tracking? But more importantly, what do they want to learn? And if you look at this, I took a snapshot from this part of the survey when they registered. And if you take a look at it, people want to know how to utilize our service business to gain more sales, how to sell more vehicles from the service department, how to be more effective, take away something new, what the title indicated. That's what people want. And if you notice this, most of these people gave us the information. It told us they're really interested. Yes, this GM here typed in 1, 2, 3. That's fine. But the majority of them, if you ask, they'll tell you. So we took this information, and then we sat down and we said, okay, let's flow the timing of this. So we will do a welcome just as Joe did today. We'll do a poll to kind of break the ice and get some feedback from the audience. And then Jim Ziegler, who's our thought leader, is going to come in and is going to talk about what you've always done isn't working and why. And he's going to give those examples. And then we'll do another poll to raise the importance of how many people who have car dealerships are losing sales to other dealers even though they go to their service department. And then we came in with the case study, and we wanted to know in the case study a profile of the organization, what was his challenges, options, what was implemented, what were the business results, what were the lessons learned. And we did it, and we determined in going through this that it was best to do it as an interview. And that kept us on track. We had a lot of information to do. Then we wanted to have a call to action, and we wanted to have an opportunity to ask the experts. So we did this. And what was interesting was we brought the invitation back in, and some of the folks said, oh yeah, we got to talk about this, we got to talk about that. And what we found out, Joe, was that one of the key points wasn't covered, so we had to put it in there. Why is that important? We promised the audience we'd cover it. We needed to do it. So we brought on the panel, we introduced them, and I got to tell you, if Joe, if you told me to go to Central Casting and get 3 car people, I don't think I could have done a better job than these people. Do you?
Very nice. Yeah, I think it's missing some. I think we don't have the all-American feel there, do we?
No, I mean I'm ready to go get a hot dog and a Coke and go look at a Chevrolet this afternoon. I tell you,
absolutely.
This is it. So we went from this, and this was the first slide they gave us. Okay, it's interesting. So what you've always done isn't working nearly as well as it used to. All right, that was before. We said, let's see if we can't put a graphic into it to make it come to life. Let's shorten down the text. So this is what we recommended, and I think as you look at it, it's a lot easier to look at. The graphic is nice. It takes your focus off having to read everything. Then we wanted a profile of the Kelly Automotive Group. This was the car dealership, and we asked them, tell us, because you got to start off. This is not a commercial. But tell us a little bit about who you are. Where are you? So this is what they had, and then afterwards, we used their logo, put their theme, their branding in there, just very high level. Where they do business, and just kind of makes it just a little bit more pleasing. And then when it came to the business outcomes and results, we talked about it. As a result of what they did, and I'm missing half the presentation, but I just needed to give the audience an idea. They talked about they gathered intelligence on the customer and the service drive, and it helped them be able to start a conversation to help convert service customers into a sale. Very much like a webinar. They were interested. They had something to talk about, and they were able to buy quality cars. But the most important thing is they sold 3% of the repair orders new cars. That's what the audience wanted to hear. And Joe, do you know that within 10 minutes after the webinar last week, someone called up and asked for a demo? That's how compelling they were.
It's not surprising. It looks like what you're recommending is kind of what we do as well. Less than 30 words on any PowerPoint slide.
Yes.
Like if you're even coming close to the 30 words, you're probably way too verbose, correct?
Yeah, yes. And and that's a good point. The thing to remember is when you're working with multiple speakers and panelists, they all have a day job, and their day job in this case is to run a dealership, not to do PowerPoint. So we had to help them. And if all they had to do was to do slides, that would be one thing. So we had to help them along. And in fact, they didn't even have slides. We had to kind of do some interviewing with them to get the highlights out. But there's an important part to a webinar, and I think I've got the best in the world on this webinar, and that's looking at the moderator as an integral part and also as your coach. A good moderator is essential. It's like the orchestra leader. It's the rhythm section in a group. It keeps things on track. It makes the speakers feel comfortable. But most importantly, a good moderator will build trust with his panelist or her panelist, develop passion so they're able to bring their best out. And they have to have the courage to be direct. If they're not on track, if they're selling, if they're just not hitting it, they've got to say it. But I always remember The King's Speech as a fabulous, entertaining movie that also was a good primer on why a moderator is a good person as the coach. So we're done now putting the content together. We used the invite to architect the flow. We made sure that we delivered on what we promised. We created a flow of the webinar to align with bullets. We budgeted time for welcome, polls, and Q&A. And remember, you've probably only got 35 minutes of actual air time. Use it wisely. Now we're getting ready. We've gone through several dress rehearsals and we've gone back and forth. People are comfortable. Now we're at the go live day. And this is where we want to do the final sound check. Probably nothing is more important than audio. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. If there's anything that creates an annoyance with an audience is when they can't hear you or you're not coming across crisply. Sometimes it's on their end, particularly if someone's listening and they're multitasking and they've got 27 applications open, it's going to depress the ability to hear you. But oftentimes it's on the speaker side. So we want to make sure that everybody can be heard. And on the final day, on the go live day, we like to have our panelists come 60 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes before, just to get ready. You want to launch your webinar hosting platform and meet with the speakers, make sure everything goes right. Have the show afterwards, debrief, take 5 minutes to have everybody come back to a virtual meeting and see how the meeting met their expectations, give them some high-level metrics. But now you want to begin your post-webinar sales follow-up. So let's go into sound checks, okay? This is probably one of the most important areas. And I actually have a book that, or an ebook that we wrote for Citrix, and I'm going to share it with you at the end. It's called The 5 Things You Must Know About Webinar Audio. But here's why it's so important. These devices with the X, you do not want to use. You don't want to use a speakerphone, you don't want to use a cell phone, and you don't want to use an open mic. And I'm going to show you why. So right now, I'm speaking on my my broadcast microphone. And let me show you the other devices. So you can connect with a landline, which is free, or if your platform provider has voice over IP, such as GoToWebinar, you can either use a consumer headset, which you can get from Amazon. They're relatively inexpensive, plugs into your USB port, or the one that I'm using, which is the AT20 in the middle there. And that just has larger electronics and the ability to move more air. But let me show you the difference. So Joe, I'm going to go mute myself here, and feel free to vamp if I don't come back right away. But I'm going to pick up a landline, and I want you to hear the difference. So give me a second.
Okay, that sounds good. And by the way, just so everybody knows, I'm using the consumer headset on the right, so you can sort of look at the difference there.
All right,
You back,
All
Mark?
right, I'm on a landline phone right now,
and
hopefully
you can hear the difference. I'm not going to take the landline, and I'm going to go to the speakerphone, and what you should hear is a barrier between me and everybody in the audience. Let me try that. Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, yes.
Okay, so I'm speaking over the speakerphone. Now, I'm going to pick up my cell phone and see the difference. I'm here on the cell phone, so you can hear the cell phone, a little bit of a difference in quality. Sometimes you have to use it, but again, let's go for what really works. So I'm gonna mute this and come back to my mic.
All right.
Hopefully I'm back on my
that's
USB headset.
Boy, that's such a huge difference. You know, if you don't have such high quality to start with, you usually don't notice it, but man, is that such a difference in audio quality.
Good. You know, I learned a long time ago, never do a demo unless you know how it's going to turn out.
Well, exactly. I think the one thing that's important, and we talk about this with video as well as webinars, more than anything else, more than if they can see what's going on, is actually the audio. That's when people get the most frustrated.
We get mail from people all the time. I can't hear, and okay, could you turn up your volume? But you try everything. It's like you go to your favorite restaurant. If you didn't get a good meal, guess what? It's the restaurant's fault. So you always got to really make your audience feel upfront and personal. Another thing to do in audio is your speed. And there's a couple great things that I would recommend. There's some free speed tests, megapath.com, speedtest.net. And you want to do this test and check for your upload and download speeds. I like to see the more, you can't get enough speed. The more the merrier. But if you can get several megabits per second upload and download, you're doing well. There's also other tests. And one thing I have to tell you here, my opinion, the secret weapon of working with GoToWebinar beyond the platform is their sales, or not their sales, their support organization. These gentlemen and ladies are the greatest in the world. If you have a problem and you've got some intrigue going on, they will help you. They listen, they know how to troubleshoot. And part of the problem I was having for a while required doing a little bit more sophisticated testing to measure the time between hops. So there's a lot of things you can do, and if you're working with GoToWebinar, don't hesitate to call the support desk. They can help you. But I would also do a speed test. So again, we start the sound check before we go live. We always have a pre-flight checklist. Always has to be a plan B. I flew home last night from New York, and of course I was in the emergency row, and the flight attendant came by and said, in the unlikely event, will you be willing to assist in a landing? Yeah, okay, all that. Right. Never happens, except it did once to me. Good idea to have a checklist, just so you know what's going to happen. Review the final slides. Make sure all non-essential apps are off. Turn off cell phones, your ringers. Put up a do not disturb sign. Don't have your Outlook on or it's going to ding. And then I always like to launch the splash screen 20 minutes prior to going live, just to make sure everything is working. And as always, print out a hard copy of your PowerPoint notes so you can have them in the event you need to follow along. The human factors. If you remember from the first session, I talked about there's 4 things a webinar producer always manages: the business drivers, the logistics, the human factors, and the technology. Learn to work your microphone. You can use inflections. You should smile. Your breathing. All of that will communicate and come across to your audience. You gotta think like a broadcaster and communicate that way, regardless of your device. When you go live, the big day, start on time, end on time. Don't penalize those people who got here early for those people who are late. Start on time. Welcome your audience, as Joe did. It's okay to be enthusiastic. It's okay to excite, but don't sell. It's not a place to sell. And again, think about the flow. You want a dialogue versus a monologue, and make sure there's some call to actions or next steps. Where can they get more information? Probably the most important thing, Joe, is that this is really about connection. It's not about perfection. If you make a mistake, so what? Just make sure you're connecting with the audience. Okay.
Well, Mike, I guess the one thing, in what you just went through the last 10 minutes, the one thing that I see almost no organizations doing is this idea of the moderator. Actually having somebody on that's consistent every time, that's running this, that's working times between, kind of being the voice of the brand, let's say. And let's talk about that do you see that done very often? And I think what really you're talking about is, because you just went through a list of a lot of stuff and everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I have to do all those things. But I think we're so used to really bad webinars that when we see one that actually works well, we're very, very surprised. So our opportunity is to differentiate. I would say from all the stuff you said is really, if you do this checklist, it will really make a difference. And second, should everybody on here actually set somebody and say, you are sort of the moderator for our webinar programs?
Yes. I think from the simple standpoint of having someone to just be objective and make sure the panelists are comfortable. Even if you're talking to an experienced speaker, you need to make sure they're relaxed. The moderator takes a lot of the burden off them. 2, the moderator should also be a very good listener, and the moderator should also be able to coach. And there isn't a webinar that I have done in the hundreds and hundreds where we don't have someone as the moderator. I mean, it's just part of it. It's just part of a polished webinar, and that really is a way to supercharge your webinar because it makes it engaging. And yes, you should have somebody, and somebody needs to be able to be quick on their feet, They need to have somewhat of a sense of humor. They can't get too ruffled because they're going to get a call. And I know Caroline from GoToWebinar is probably smiling when I say this, but there's not that we get requests to change things at the 11th hour. It's like at 11:45. You've got to be able to deal with it and keep everybody calm. But absolutely, a moderator is critical to a successful webinar. You bet, Joe. So we had a great show. Now let's go from show to sale. How do we get winning leads with webinars? So I want to talk about a couple things that you need to do, and we're right on track. The most important thing is some housekeeping immediately, and you want to do this within 1 to 2 days after your webinar. First, edit and archive a final copy of the webinar recording. And what do I mean by edit? When we do a webinar, we edit out all of the housekeeping, all the non-essential banter that isn't necessary for somebody to view it as an on-demand recording. But by archiving it, and I'll show you in just a moment, it really can become the content marketing gift that keeps giving, because there's so much opportunity for people to view that. Always send a thank you email ready with the on-demand link to everybody who registered and didn't attend, and all the attendees. Thank them for their interest, provide them a little information where they can get more information. Here's a link to hear more, and then you want to do your final analytics. I'm going to talk about some of the analytics in just a moment. This is critical, because if we're going to be able to start converting from prospects into customers, we have to understand who was here, how did they feel about this webinar, and then go back to your planning. Did the webinar meet your outcomes? Did you get the profile you wanted? Did you get the attendees you wanted? Did you get the messaging you wanted? You need to go through that, and then part of that is sifting through your life cycle intelligence of the information you captured before, during, and after. And then you want to begin segmenting leads. And then always follow up on unanswered live questions from the webinar. As you said, Joe, those questions that we can't answer on air, we'll get back to you. Once you do that, now you start the real sales process. So I talked about ensuring predictable outcomes, and this is just really making sure that while you did the webinar, either met your goals or didn't, and what are the lessons learned from it. The life cycle intelligence, this is probably the most valuable part, because before the event, you're going to be able to gather profile data on your registrants. You're going to learn their interests. And a perfect example from that what would you like to learn from this webinar? Enormous information on their interest. Helps us focus our speakers on what to talk about and make sure we're on track. And we can gather information from social media. During the webinar, we use online polls. And I'm going to show you how some of those work. The live questions. We can also measure their purchase intention. And I'm going to give you an example of this. This is probably one of the greatest things a webinar can do. A survey. How did today's webinar meet your expectations? We want to hear, what did you like? What could we have done better? What else would you like to learn? And then after the event, you can survey and you can do on-demand views, and you begin your lead nurturing. So let's get under the hood and look at these metrics that I talked about earlier. There are 6 key webinar metrics that are used to measure where you are before, during, and after, and these are absolute predictors of your success. The most important one is the click-through ratio. We spent a lot of time on this in part 1, and the click-through ratio is simply how many people came to your registration landing page, how many registered. The higher the number, the more certainty of your registration and your attendance. If you have a 25-28% click-through ratio, you're doing okay. If you're in the 30s, even better. In the 40s, fantastic. How many people that registered attended? Simple ratio. Just take the amount of people that attended, divide it by the people that registered, and you'll know. I like to see 40%. Doing online polls allows people to weigh in, but it also measures engagement. On this last poll we did, we had about 67% of the audience vote. That's good. Tells me that there's some level of interest. Exit surveys that I just talked about, your audience retention. How well did you hold your audience? And I'll show you that, and measuring your on-demand viewings. Audience retention is probably one of the most important things, because if you're going to be able to convert prospects into customers, you have to have their interest. And the only way you're going to have their interest is by giving them valuable information. And what you see here is, this is for the webinar we did last week, and this is a sales and marketing audience. It shows across the x-axis right about when we went live, and the counts through the webinar. We like to see 80% of the peak attendance on at the start of the Q&A. So the peak attendance was 155. We had 100. We needed to hit 124. We were at 145. So we were over our benchmark. We knew we were holding them. And then what's going to happen is, as you go through the Q&A, people will start to drift off, and that's fine. They got their value. They're interested. They want to prepare for our next meeting. That's fine. But we want to keep them here. But Joe, let me show you something. This is a 60-minute webinar for sales and marketing crowd. Here's another one that we did recently, and this is for an engineering crowd. Now, what's particularly interested is that this is a 90-minute webinar, Joe, not 60. And this audience can't not get enough information from this particular provider. And if you look at the counts, they held pretty steady. That's what we want to see, high retention. The point is, whether it's a sales and marketing or engineering, if the content is solid and delivered well, they'll stay. Any comments on this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on with it. I think that most audiences will give us like 20 minutes or so, and if it's not good, we'll just see them fall off. I mean, just looking at this webinar right here, you know, we've kept the majority of people on, so obviously you're saying some good things. So yeah, I would completely agree with that, and it show you can use that then to get better speakers and to go back to those that have really done well and retain those people throughout the webinar.
Absolutely. So here's some of the information that is almost impossible to get from downloading a white paper or anything else other than a webinar, where you have this month of a campaign to recruit people to learn from them. So we asked a question, and I had to change the name of the products just to protect my sponsor. But we asked them, do you recommend, specify, or influence the purchase of A or B technology? So we did this up front. We wanted to make sure we had people who would get value out of this. Look at that. 48% said yes to both. Only 23% said no. 22% said yes to A. 7% said yes to B. Pretty qualified audience. Then we asked them, after the webinar, on a scale of 1 to 5, how did today's webinar meet your expectations? 11% said it exceeded. 54% said it was above. 22% said it met. Great. 13% couldn't help them. And I think if you can get at least 80% of your audience to say it met, was above, or exceeded, you're doing well. You can't please everybody. But here is probably the most important thing from this experience and how to convert prospects to customers. What is your intent to purchase? So we asked this question in the survey. Having attended today's webinar, your plans to purchase or acquire A or B products, and we had a 26% response from the audience. 47% said it increased. 24% said they were just researching but now intend to acquire. 24% were just researching, they see no need. 5% said it decreased. Joe, which of these would you segment into the sales ready that you're going to call right away?
Well, I think the one that was researching and now intend, and actually I have a question on that because Jamie asked, it's really good time for it. Jamie's asking, you know, should I follow up on a call with everyone that attends a webinar? And obviously the answer is no, but let me ask you that question in these results right here. Who gets a sales follow-up call, and do we do any of that?
Yes, we do. And I think that if it's always nice to follow up with a warm call. And Jamie, what ends up happening is that people actually appreciate it. Really? Oh, I thank you for following up. I really wanted to attend, but I couldn't, or I attended. It was great. Yeah, it doesn't hurt because they've opted in to be part of this, and they'll be very open and receptive to hear what you say. Or they said, no, I was just researching. But to answer your question, Joe, if 47% of these people increase their interest, you bet I would call them. The 24% who now intend to acquire, I'd call them too. Heck yeah. Those are people that you can get into a conversation with, and because of all the intelligence we've collected across the life cycle, before, during, and after, you can talk to them. You can see what they wanted to learn from the webinar. You have a warm conversation. So absolutely, I would follow up with them. You bet. Then, to that point, you want to be able to segment the leads, and I would put in bucket 1 all the sales ready. Call them. the ones that had the purchase intention. Bucket 2, they're not quite ready, but let's do either a call or a drip campaign to nurture them. Keep them informed. Remember, these are people that attended the webinar to learn something to make them more intelligent buyers. So let's help them along. Let's send them some information that'll help them in the process. Obviously, the ones that don't qualify, eliminate them. Don't follow up on them. Being able to take some of these insights by attendees. Here is an example. This is just a snapshot. So if you look at the top here, I broke it down into their interest, their plan to purchase this year, what would you like to learn, scale of 1 to 5, what could we have done better, what did you like most, what other topics would be of interest. This is, you talk about a series, Joe, this is a built-in gimme for a series. The audience will tell you what they want to learn, and then you can come back and create something. How do they vote in the poll, and in the second poll, and what questions? You look at these things, and you see this person here plans to purchase, not sure, just researching. This one says, yes, I would call this individual right away and be able to get into a conversation, because you know that they're interested in the practical application of MEMS and an IMU GNSS. And Joe, and I'm sure that's something that you and your staff talk about all the time. And
yeah, every day.
Every day. And is the INS always a core sensor? So yeah, you want to call on those people. Let me just go into this before we start to wrap up and take some questions. I said this earlier, that webinars are the content marketing gift that keeps on giving, and mainly because once you've recorded this thing, you can reuse it over and over and over again. And this is an actual client that had 774 viewings on an on-demand viewing, and 431 of those were in the first 45 days. But here's what's really cool. So we track it where we can tell that if they went to view it, did they register but not attend? Did they attend, or did they want to repeat viewing? Or were they fresh new leads? Did it go viral? Did they use content marketing to push this out? 12% or 90 viewings did not attend. 8% attended, but look at that, 617, Joe, 80% are fresh new sales leads. This goes right to the sales organization to begin following up on. So this is just some examples of how you can manage the webinar lifecycle to supercharge your outcomes, to really exceed your commercial goals and delight your audience. And so let me take a moment on the final curtain call before we go into the questions. Anybody, and I mean anybody, can do a mediocre webinar. But to do one, you've got to balance the ability to attract, engage, inspire, and convert them from a prospect to a customer. That's where the hard work comes in. And remember, if you want to supercharge demand generation webinars, they're always content driven, not fluff. It's got to be real. It's got to be something where the status quo is constantly being challenged. The markets are disruptive. Maybe what you have is a case study of a solution that disrupts the disruption, and you can measure the outcomes. So the case for getting webinar ready is having a methodology, as I started in the beginning, having best practices, and having metrics and knowing how to use them. But it's also balancing the business drivers, the logistics, the human factors, and the technology to make it all come together. You do that, that green arrow goes up, your audience is delighted, you meet your goals. Now, what I'd like to do to continue the conversation is let you know that I have a couple of e-guides that are out. But Joe, I think we're ready for some Q&A. So you want to start the questions coming?
Yes, and everybody, if you want to ask questions, now's the time. We have a lot of questions here, Mike, and let's do rapid fire here. I'm going to try to get out as many as I can, and you just go ahead and answer them. We have a ton of questions about the headset and the audio and whatnot. Here's my question. I'm going to wrap them all up in one. Would you actually send your speakers a consumer headset to use, or how do you? Because that's the biggest issue. Most of the time when you get a speaker on the phone, they got whatever they've got, right? What do you? Can you prep that at all? Should you send them one? What
Yes.
should you do if they don't have one?
Yeah, actually, what I do it's exactly what I do when we go through numerous sound checks, and when we can hear within 3 notes if they're connecting, and we'll ask them if they have one. If they do, great. If not, we'll send them one from Amazon. I'll just buy one from Amazon, and you can buy them for, I don't know, $20, $30, and it works just fine. Yeah, I would send it to them. I wouldn't even mess around. And also, I would ask them, where are you going to be on webinar day? Because that's another important variable. If they're not going to be at their home base of their office, you definitely want to make sure that they're not calling in on their cell phone. So the answer is yes.
I've seen that somebody does that so many times for training, where they'll be training and where they're at their computer at their desk, and then for the regular show, they're on their cell phone. They're out of town. They just didn't tell you. Dolores asks, any tips for presenters who are subject matter experts, but English is not their first language, so they're more comfortable? Have you had any experience with that?
Yes, Doris, we've had lots of that. We've had speakers in Beijing, we've had speakers in Denmark, in Germany, all on the same call. What I would recommend is to listen to what it is they have to say. Is it a matter that their English is such that they can't communicate clearly, but behind that is a lot of passion and a lot of interest? A good technique is to interview them. And what I mean by that is, instead of turning them loose, is to say, well, let's talk a little bit about your case study. What would you like the audience to walk away with? Great. Well, tell us a little bit about the profile. What is the organization about, and what were some of your challenges? And then tell us some of the options. If you do that like an interview, it takes the burden off them. They appreciate it. And also, you do that for people who may not be able to speak at their full volume. Sometimes you get people who are shy. That'll help bring them out. But yes, I would do that.
Great. Yeah, you're right. You still want them because they're subject matter experts.
Yeah.
So get a really good moderator to help them work it through. It'll be fantastic. Another question here from Tricia is asking, is there special software to edit the webinar recording? Do you have a recommendation on that?
I do. We use a program called Camtasia 8. It's by a company called TechSmith. It's a relatively powerful editing bench. You can get it online by going to TechSmith. I think it's a couple $100. And we actually record the webinar using that. We do a backup recording and go to webinar, but it's a very powerful tool. Yes, I would recommend that.
And then we've got a couple questions on what's the general expectations for people that are going to be on a live webinar and then show up on demand. Can you give some more benchmarks to that?
Yeah, I think, I gave the example of that on-demand viewing where I think we had 774 viewings. I would say most people will come to the live webinar and you will get 10 to 20, 25% to watch it on demand. The pacing item is how many people who registered are out of the 4 time zones of the U.S., out of North America. So in some cases, we have people register from 50, 60 countries. They're going to watch it on demand. I think a lot of it is geographical. So but to me, the majority, you want to get the majority of the people to be there live. It's just a different experience if they're there live than if they're on demand. But if they can't be there live, watch it on demand.
Well, I think the other thing, Mike, is as you do a series, you'll start to figure out what your benchmarks are. For example, for Content Marketing Institute, we generally see between 30 and 40% of the people coming live. We also know that within 6 months, we generally see over 100%. So basically, more than the number that were originally registered to view the webinar. That seems to be very consistent for us. And I think that it just depends on the audience that you're looking at as well. I mean, we can't, to your point, we have 40% of our audience is international. I don't expect people in Australia to wake up in the middle of the night unless we start changing the times for our webinar.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's the same thing there. Tom, there's a couple questions here on how do I know my attendees are qualified. Can you talk a little bit to, and I don't know, we didn't get into integrating, the people that attend with your marketing automation system, but we could get really into the weeds on, knowing if this person is engaged in your other content. Do you want to talk to that at all, or do you want to follow up on that subject?
No, I can give an answer.
Yes, just your take on, so we know somebody has attended, so we know they've registered, we know they've attended, so that says something about who they are. I mean, what are other steps that we can take to look against our existing database, maybe other marketing automation components? What would your answer be?
Well, I think marketing automation is a perfect next step. do we have a marketing automation platform that has web forensics built into it? For instance, we use a platform for marketing automation and email marketing called Sales Fusion. And when we don't gate a lot of items on our site, if somebody wants a data sheet, they can download it, but I can see the activity. But if somebody actually wants to come back and they're searching, I'd like to know about it to see if there's a trend. So one way is to using marketing automation to track who they are. I think, though, Joe, it starts with defining your profile. You want to target and attract an audience that would find relevance and interest in what you're doing. So that takes a lot of work up front to segment the audience and make sure you have the right titles and the right people. That's usually what we do. But there is a fairly long time between interest and purchase. And sometimes you obviously don't see the purchase, but you can see the activity by tracking them. I'm not sure I answered it the best I could.
No, I think you're right. I think the question is, I mean, it depends on how sophisticated your technology program is, and you're absolutely right. You might just be one of those companies that do a webinar. You're going to look at the list, you're going to ferret it out to sales, and you're going to have them call on it. Or you might be a little bit more advanced and say, look, we don't contact somebody unless they've engaged in 4 pieces of content and for sure this piece of content.
Exactly.
And then you follow up.
Yep.
So basically that's lead scoring, and that's a completely different webinar. But
yeah.
But I guess the answer to the question is it depends on how you're going to score your leads, and I would just be very careful because most of the people that are on your webinar probably aren't ready to buy, but they will be.
Exactly.
Mike Lindsay's asking if we don't have a good moderator in the organization, could we go outside and get somebody to moderate on a consistent basis that's not with the company?
You could. Lindsay, be happy to talk to you about that. We do a lot of that ourselves, but yeah, absolutely. There are people out there that are professional moderators, and as long as they're able to really step in and help guide the process and make you successful, there's a lot of them out there. But be happy if you want to talk about it to drop me an email or give me a call.
Real brief, we got a couple more a couple more minutes for questions. So if you have some last-minute questions, get them in. But there's a lot of questions here. Gail included is talking about how do I build a list so that I can drive attendees for my emails. I have a couple takes on this, but why don't you give your couple and then I'll follow up.
On how you can build or acquire a list?
How do you build? Yeah, so build, acquire, so Gail doesn't have a list right now to go to. What's the first place to start? Well,
one thing is I always like to leverage off other people that have a position and reputation in the industry. One is to work with publishers. We do a lot of work with publishers. They are the neutral third party. They have an opt-in list. If you have something of value and you can strike a deal with them, they can help you with your promotion. Certainly, there are list brokers. There's Data.com, Jigsaw, Salesforce. There's all different types of ways to acquire a list out there. It's much a black art, if you will, as a science, and it's not an easy thing to do. But again, if you want to contact me after the webinar, I'd be happy to give you some ideas and talk about it.
We have time for one more question, and I think I asked you this last time, Mike, but I'm going to do it again. What's that one question that you get more than anything else that you feel that needs to be answered that we didn't cover today? Is there one in particular, or do you want me to throw another one out at you?
No, I think that it's not so much the question as my observation.
Okay.
And my observation, it really is giving feedback around how well thought out is your message. Why would somebody want to give up an hour of their time? What are they going to get by spending that hour with you? And are you really helping them solve a business challenge or problem, or are you just trying to pitch them something? I think that is probably the biggest thing. If what you have is going to solve a disruptive problem, like I mentioned with the MPI people with that car thing, that was a grand slam home run out of the park. That's the number one thing. What is it what value are you going to give, and how are you going to deliver it to have credibility and connect with your audience? That's really what it comes down to.
Mike, I think that's a fantastic way to leave. How are we solving the informational pain points of our customers and prospects? If we're doing that, that's a good start to a home run when it comes to webinars. Mike, thank you so much.
Hey, it's been a blast. Thank you, Joe.
Did a great job. I always like doing webinars with you. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to GoToWebinar, Citrix for putting this on again. Mike Agron at WebAttract, thank you. Thank you to all the folks at Content Marketing Institute that helped put this on. Once again, a reminder that you will be getting an email in the next 24 hours with links to the archive presentation and maybe some other helpful links as well. And if you have any questions about webinars or content marketing, please feel free to contact myself or Mike, and we'll be happy to help you go on in the future. But once again, thanks again for attending, and look forward to seeing you on another webinar in the very near future.